I'm Nathan, 29 years old. Right. Once, I booked Thanksgiving dinner for my entire family at Omaha's most expensive restaurant, only to discover they were celebrating at home without me. Before I share how a single worn envelope changed my life, night, tell me where you're watching from in the comments. It helps me feel connected knowing you're out there. It all began with a phone call, but my anxiety had started hours earlier. I stood before a full-length mirror in a hotel room I'd rented specifically for the occasion, wanting to prepare without the oppressive silence of my own apartment. The suit I wore cost more than my first car. It was a deep charcoal gray, perfectly tailored. I saw it as armor, and tonight I desperately needed it. My reflection stared back a stranger in expensive clothes, eyes wide with a desperate, childish hope that, at 29, I should have outgrown. My heart hammered against my ribs. This was it. The culmination of a lifetime of effort. The ultimate grand gesture. I'd secured a private dining room at the Paxton, place where senators and CEOs closed deals over incredibly expensive meals. I'd pre-ordered everything, remembering each of their favorites. Herb-roasted turkey for Robert, creamed corn for Ellen, sweet potato casserole with extra marshmallows for Sophia, and even Kevin's preferred brand of sparkling cider. Every detail was a carefully placed brick in the wall of my perceived worth. Tonight, they would have to see it. Tonight, they would have to acknowledge I belonged. Then my phone buzzed, unnaturally loud in the quiet room. My stomach dropped. It was my mother, Ellen, or, to be precise, my foster mother. That distinction felt more crucial than ever tonight. I took a breath and answered, pitching my voice to be cheerful, casual. "Hey, are you guys on your way?" "Nathan, honey," she began. I immediately detected the performance in her voice, her concerned socialite tone, the one she used when canceling a charity luncheon. "Oh, I have the most terrible news. I am so sorry. Your father, he's come down with something dreadful. A terrible stomach bug. He can't even get out of bed. We can't possibly make it tonight." A wave of cold, familiar dread washed over me. It was the same feeling I got as a kid when a promised outing was canceled last minute. But I was an adult now. I pushed it down. "Oh no, is he okay? Is it serious? Is there anything I can do? I can come over." No, dear, absolutely not. "He wouldn't want you to catch it," she said, her voice smooth as polished marble. "You just needs to rest. You just go ahead and enjoy your evening. It's such a terrible shame to let that beautiful reservation go to waste. Really, we feel awful." Her words were perfect, each one a polished stone of regret, but there was no warmth beneath them. It was a script, a well-rehearsed one. I felt a cold knot tighten in my stomach, a gut feeling honed by years of deciphering the space between what my family said and what they meant. "Okay," I said, my own voice sounding distant. "Well, tell him I hope he feels better soon." "I will." "Sweetie, you have a wonderful Thanksgiving." She hung up. The silence that flooded the room was absolute, a physical weight. My reflection in the mirror mocked me, a fool in a suit, standing alone in a room paid for with a hope that had just been declared dead on arrival. I should have taken the suit off, ordered a pizza, and turned on a football game. I should have accepted the lie, swallowed the bitter pill of disappointment like I had 1,000 times before, and just survived another holiday alone. That was the old Nathan's move. That was the path of least resistance. But something inside me, something that had been building for months, maybe even years, finally snapped. It wasn't a loud crack, but a quiet seismic shift. Maybe it was the sheer audacity of the lie. Maybe it was the echo of my therapist's words in my head. Dr. Rivera had been helping me see the pattern, the cycle of my own making. She'd called this dinner my final experiment, a way to gather undeniable data. Well, the data was in. So I did something I had never ever done before. I didn't get angry. I got methodical. I picked up my car keys, walked out of the hotel, and got into my car. In the passenger seat was a ridiculously expensive hand-woven gift basket filled with artisanal cheeses, wine, and imported chocolate, so another piece of my desperate plea for acceptance. I buckled it in like a passenger. I started driving, not back to my empty apartment, but towards their part of town. towards the grand colonial-style house in the suburbs where I had spent 18 years living in the attic room, listening to the sounds of a family I was adjacent to, but never a part of. I told myself I was just going to drop off the gift basket on their porch, a final dutiful gesture. The good son, concerned for his sick father, but I knew deep down I was a detective heading to a crime scene. I was looking for proof of the lie. I parked a block away under the shadow of a large oak tree, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles were white. I got out, the expensive basket feeling foolishly heavy in my arms. I walked down the quiet, tree-lined street, the air crisp with the smell of autumn and distant wood smoke. And then I saw it. The house was ablaze with light through the large, uncurtained bay window. The entire scene was laid out like a diorama in a museum of my personal hell. Robert, my foster father, my supposedly bedridden father, was standing by the fireplace, looking the very picture of robust health. He was holding a glass of amber liquid whiskey, his favorite aunt laughing, his head thrown back. Ellen was bustling around the dining room table, her face animated as she directed Sophia. And there were my foster siblings, Kevin and Sophia. Not just present, but vibrant, alive, arguing playfully over something on the table. They were all there, the whole happy family, celebrating Thanksgiving without me. The world went silent. The sounds of the neighborhood, the distant traffic, my own breathing, it all vanished. There was only that brightly lit window, a cruel tableau of belonging from which I was explicitly excluded. The gift basket slipped from my numb fingers. It didn't crash. It landed softly on a bed of damp leaves, the cellophane crinkling in protest. The sound was pathetic. Small, but in my head, it was an explosion. It was the sound of a 30-year-old delusion finally dying. I stumbled back to my car, my lungs burning as if I'd been holding my breath for my entire life. I fumbled for my phone, my fingers clumsy and useless. I scrolled past Ellen's name, past Robert's, past the whole family of liars, until I found the one number that had never been a lie. I pressed the call button. "Grandpa," I choked out the word, a ragged tear in the silence when he answered. "It's me. They did it again." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. I could hear the crackle of a fireplace, the ticking of an old clock. Then his voice came, heavy and freighted with a weariness that seemed to stretch. "Back decades. Stay where you are, kiddo. Don't move. I'm on my way. It's time." You're probably sitting there thinking, why? Why would a 29-year-old man, a guy who pulls a six-figure salary as a financial analyst at one of the most prestigious firms in the Midwest, put himself through this humiliation? Why was I still, after all these years, chasing the approval of people who so clearly held me in contempt? It's a fair question. It's the same question I've been trying to answer for the better part of a year. Sitting on a plush leather couch in the sterile, quiet office of Dr. Lena Rivera. She was the corporate therapist my company kept on retainer, a perk I'd never thought I'd use until the emptiness in my life became too big to ignore. "It's a deeply ingrained pattern, Nathan," she told me during our session just last week, her voice gentle but firm. "Think of it like an addiction. You're addicted to the hope of their validation. Every small kindness, every neutral comment, you interpret it as a sign that maybe this time it will be different. It's a trauma bond. The instinct to win the love of your primary caregivers is one of the most powerful forces in human psychology, even when they are the source of your pain." She had me map it out. My whole life was a series of escalating attempts to prove my worth. It started small, getting straight A's in elementary school. Then it was winning the state science fair in middle school. In high school, I became captain of the debate team and got a full academic scholarship to the University of Nebraska, saving them the expense of a college fund they never intended to start for me anyway. Each time I'd present my achievement to them like a cat laying a dead mouse on the doorstep, my heart pounding with the desperate plea, "Love me now. Is this enough?" The response was always the same, a dismissive, "That's nice, dear," from Ellen, a grunt of acknowledgement from Robert. They attended none of my award ceremonies. My high school graduation was a lonely affair with only one person in the audience cheering for me, my grandfather. Henry, after college, I thought money would be the language they understood. I got the job at the firm. I worked relentlessly, climbing the ladder faster than anyone expected. I got the promotion to lead analyst and I started sending them money. I paid for a new roof on their house. I covered Kevin's ever-present business debts, which we all knew were gambling losses. I sent them on an anniversary cruise. Was trying to buy my way into the family to become an asset so valuable they couldn't afford to discard me. But all it did was make me a reliable ATM. It's Thanksgiving dinner, Dr. Rivera had said, leaning forward, her eyes searching mine.
How?
You see it as the ultimate test, don't you? You've created a scenario so grand, so public, so undeniably generous that in your mind they have no choice but to show up and finally acknowledge you. You framed it as your final experiment. She was right. And as I sat in my car staring at that house full of light and laughter, I knew the experiment was over. The data was conclusive, and the results were devastating. Staring at that brightly lit window, the past wasn't just a memory. It was a physical presence in the car with me. It wasn't one single dramatic act of cruelty that defined my childhood. It was death by 1,000 paper cuts, a slow, systematic erosion of my sense of self. The memories came back now, not as a flood, but as a series of sharp, vivid snapshots. Each one a testament to the lie I had been living. Snapshot 1. Age 7. My first parent-teacher conference. I was a shy kid, but I loved school because it was the one place where I felt competent. My teacher, Mrs. Davidson, a kind woman with a warm smile, was showing Ellen my latest project, a diorama of the solar system I'd spent weeks on. He's exceptionally bright, Mrs. Davidson said, beaming. Real pleasure to have in class. My mother, Ellen, smoothed the skirt of her expensive dress, smiled her polished public smile, and said, "Yes, he's a good boy. Landon is very clever." Landon, not Nathan. It was a name she reserved for public consumption, a subtle but clear signal to the outside world. It meant, he is in my care, but he is not of me. I remember the hot flush of shame that crept up my neck. I tugged on her sleeve, my voice a tiny whisper. "My name is Nathan." She didn't look at me. I just patted my head, her long manicured fingers feeling like ice against my scalp. "Of course it is, dear," she murmured, her attention already drifting away. Snapshot 2. Age 12. It was Sophia's birthday. She was obsessed with birds that year, so I decided to make her the most beautiful birdhouse in the world. I spent every afternoon for a week in Grandpa Henry's workshop at the farm, using the tools and skills he had patiently taught me. I sanded the wood until it was smooth as silk, carefully cut the pieces, and assembled them with a precision that made my 12-year-old heart swell with pride. I painted it her favorite color, a soft lavender. It was, I thought, a masterpiece. It was a piece of my heart. I wrapped it carefully and placed it on the gift table at her party. The next morning, while taking out the trash, I saw it. A flash of lavender in the bottom of the bin, crushed beneath empty cake boxes and discarded wrapping paper. I pulled it out, my creation splintered and broken. When I confronted Sophia, holding the wreckage in my hands, tears streaming down my face, she just rolled her eyes with the practiced disdain of a teenage girl. "It was ugly, Nathan," she said, as if explaining the simplest fact in the world. "It was all crooked. It didn't match my room." Snapshot 3. Age 16. Kevin, my golden boy foster brother, had taken his brand new, expensive mountain bike for a joyride and crashed it badly. He'd thrown it in the garage in a tantrum. Knowing how much Robert valued expensive things, I decided to fix it. I stayed up half the night using online tutorials and the tools from my own small kit, painstakingly straightening the bent frame. In realigning the gears, I was just wiping the grease from my hands, a feeling of quiet satisfaction in my chest, when Robert stormed into the garage. His face, when he saw me standing over the bike, was a mask of thunderous rage. He snatched the wrench from my hand. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" He snarled, his voice a low growl. "Don't you ever touch things that aren't yours? This is a $2,000 piece of equipment. You have no idea what you're doing. You've probably ruined it." He didn't check my work. He didn't ask. He just assumed. Incompetence. He assumed the worst. That was the theme. The constant humming undercurrent in that house. You are not one of us. You are other. You're a temporary arrangement, a project they had taken on. You are a debt to be tolerated, not a son to be cherished. My grandfather, Henry, was the only antidote to the poison of that house. He was Robert's father, but they were cut from entirely different cloths. Robert was a man of contracts and bottom lines, a real estate mogul who saw the world in terms of assets and liabilities. Henry was a man of the earth, farmer with soil permanently etched into the lines of his calloused hands and a quiet, unshakable strength in his pale blue eyes. His farm, a sprawling, messy, wonderful place to ours outside of Omaha, was my only real home, my only sanctuary. He never spoke of love, not in the flowery way you see in movies. He showed it. He showed it in the patient way he taught me to change the oil in his old Ford truck, explaining every step without a hint of condescension. He showed it in the afternoons spent in his garden, teaching me the difference between a weed and a seedling. The quiet satisfaction of growing your own food. He showed it on the worn porch swing, where he taught me the simple, mournful chords of old folk songs on his battered acoustic guitar. His rough voice singing of lost loves and lonely highways. He was the only one who ever looked me straight in the eye and seemed to see Menathan, not the charity case, not the placeholder son. Saw a boy, and he treated him with kindness. But there was always something more, something unspoken lingering beneath the surface. He would often make cryptic comments, dropping them into our conversations like stones into a still pond. "There are stories you don't know yet, kiddo," he'd say, while we were fixing a fence. Or, "One day this will all make sense," he'd murmur. As he watched me stare wistfully at a family of birds in their nest, I never knew what he meant, but I felt the weight of his words, the hint of a secret he carried like a heavy coat. I remember my 18th birthday with painful clarity. It was a Tuesday. No one in the house said a word, not a card, not happy birthday. Nothing. The silence was a statement. After school, I didn't go home. I drove the 2 hours to the farm. Henry was waiting for me on the porch as if he knew I'd come. He didn't have a cake or a wrapped gift. He just stood up, walked into the house, and came back with an old, dusty shoebox. It was the kind sneakers used to come in, and it was tied shut with a length of thick, weathered twine. "What's this?" I'd asked. Confused, his eyes, usually so full of gentle warmth, were intensely serious. He placed the box. In my hands, it felt strangely heavy. "This is for when the time is right," he'd said, his voice low and gravelly. "Listen to me, Nathan. One day you're going to get tired. You're going to get so bone-weary of chasing ghosts that you can't take another step. You're going to get tired of trying to fill a bucket that has a giant hole in the bottom. When that day comes, the day you are finally, truly ready to stop asking them for something. They are incapable of giving you that when you open this box. Not a moment before. I had never opened it. For 11 long years, that box had been a silent passenger in my life. It moved with me from my college dorm room to my first shabby apartment, and now it sat on the top shelf of the closet in my clean, sterile, and lonely condo. It was a tangible symbol of a future I was too terrified to embrace, the future where I finally, irrevocably gave up hope. But tonight, sitting in my car, the cold of the vinyl seats seeping into my bones, the image of that happy family burned into my retinas, I knew that day had come. I didn't drive back to my apartment, thought of being inside those four walls. Surrounded by the artifacts of a life built on a false premise was suffocating. Instead, I drove to a place I hadn't been to in years. It was a small, deserted, scenic overlook on the bluffs above the Missouri River. As a teenager, this had been my escape. When the suffocating atmosphere of the house became too much, I would ride my bike out here and just stare at the dark, churning water, feeling a kinship with its restless energy. Tonight, the city lights of Omaha glittered on the far bank, a cold and distant beauty. They looked like a million tiny, indifferent stars. I got out of the car, the frigid November air hitting my face like a slap. It felt good. It felt real. My hands were trembling, not from the cold, but from a strange cocktail of fear and anticipation. As I opened my trunk, there it was, sitting next to my emergency roadside kit, the old shoebox. I pulled it out. The cardboard was soft with age, and the twine was so brittle it snapped with the slightest pressure. I carried it over to a wooden bench overlooking the river and sat down. For a moment I just held it in my lap, the weight of it feeling immense. This was the point of no return. Henry's words echoed in my head. When you are finally truly ready to stop asking, was I ready? I looked back in the direction of the city, towards that house full of light and lies. Yes, I was ready. With a deep, shuddering breath that turned into a plume of white in the cold air, I lifted the lid. The contents were simple, unassuming. Nestled on a bed of yellowed newspaper clippings from the early 1990s was a single thick envelope. It was made of heavy, cream-colored paper, the kind of expensive stationery that had gone out of style decades ago. My name, Nathan, was written on the front in a looping, elegant, and completely unfamiliar script. There was no address, no stamp. It had been hand-delivered, a message waiting in stasis for 30 years. My heart began to pound a heavy, painful rhythm against my ribs. This was it. This was the secret Henry had carried. This was the story I didn't know. With a finger that felt clumsy and numb, I slid it under the sealed flap. The paper was thick, and the seal broke with a faint, tearing sound that seemed to echo in the vast, empty night. The air suddenly felt charged, thick with the weight of a secret that had been held for longer than I had been alive. I didn't know it then, but the papers I was about to pull from that envelope wouldn't just answer my questions. They were about to detonate the entire foundation of my life, raising it to the ground to see what, if anything, could be built in its place. The first thing I pulled from the envelope was a photograph. The colors were faded, the edges soft and worn from being handled perhaps countless times. It showed a young woman no older than 20 or 21, with a cascade of sun-streaked blonde hair and a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. It was a sad, beautiful, haunted smile, but it was her eyes that made the air rush from my lungs in a single, painful gasp. They were my eyes, the same deep, startlingly blue color that had always made me feel like an anomaly in a family of people with practical brown eyes. I had Robert's jawline and Ellen's nose, they'd sometimes say, but the eyes were a mystery. I was staring at their source. My hand was shaking so violently that the image of the woman blurred. Who was she? Underneath the photo was a letter, a thick sheath of pages. The paper so fragile it felt like it might crumble into dust in my trembling hands. I unfolded it with the care of an archaeologist unearthing a priceless artifact. The script was the same as the one on the envelope, elegant, looping, and full of a character that felt both foreign and deeply familiar. It began with 2 words. That struck me like a physical blow. My dearest Nathan. I began to read, and the solid ground beneath my feet dissolved. The world tilted, spun, and then reformed itself into a new, terrifying, and heartbreaking shape. The letter was from her. Her name was Clara, and she was my biological mother. She wrote, not as a ghost, but as a young, terrified girl. She wrote of a whirlwind, desperate love with a handsome, penniless musician named David. She wrote of her family, the wealthy and powerful Thorntons of Denver, who presented a perfect facade to the world but were cold and unforgiving behind closed doors. She described the moment she told them she was pregnant, the way her father's face had turned to stone, the way her mother had called her a disgrace. They had given her an ultimatum: get rid of the problem or be cut off, disowned, cast out with. Nothing. She chose me, she wrote of David, the musician who had promised her forever but vanished the moment her family's money disappeared. She described the terrifying loneliness of being pregnant, penniless, and utterly alone in a city that suddenly felt hostile. And then she wrote about the birth. She described in raw, emotional detail the moment she first held me, a baby boy, with a shock of dark hair and his mother's bright blue eyes. She wrote about a tiny crescent-shaped birthmark on the back of my hand. As I read, my other hand instinctively went to that same mark, a small, pale shape I had carried my whole life. without a second thought. Her words were soaked in a grief so profound it felt like it was seeping off the page and into my own heart. She hadn't wanted to give me up. It had shattered her, but she was a child herself with no way to support another life. And then she wrote about an act of kindness in her darkest hour. A family driver, a good and decent man who had worked for her family for years, had found her. He had taken her in, given her shelter, promised her he would find a wonderful home for her baby. A home where he would be safe, cherished, and loved, home with his own son and daughter-in-law, a couple who were heartbroken that they couldn't have children of their own. The driver's name was Henry, my grandfather. The letter ended with a plea that was almost a prayer. She hadn't abandoned me by choice. She had given me up in the desperate hope that I could have a life she was incapable of providing. She wrote that she had spent the next 2 decades rebuilding her life from nothing, driven by a single burning desire to become someone her son could one day be proud of. And for the last 10 years, she had been searching for me. Beneath the letter, there was more, a stack of other letters, all in her hand. It's all addressed to me at Robert and Ellen's address, dating back a decade. Each one was unopened, stamped with the brutal red ink of the Postal Service returned to sender. And at the very bottom of the envelope, a crisp, modern business card. It read, Davies Investigations, Seattle, Washington. My mind was a maelstrom, a chaotic hurricane of shock, grief, and a white-hot clarifying rage that was beginning to burn through the numbness. The lies weren't just lies of omission. They were lies of commission, active, deliberate, and cruel. Just as I was trying to piece together the shattered fragments of my reality, a pair of familiar, broad headlights swept across the park. Henry's old Ford truck, a vehicle as old and reliable as the man himself, pulled up beside my car. He got out slowly, his movement stiff and pained in the cold night air, and walked over to where I sat on the bench. He didn't say a word at first. His gaze fell to the papers spread out beside me, illuminated by the faint glow of the distant city lights. Looked at the picture of Clara, and his shoulders, which had always seemed so strong, seemed to slump. "I'm sorry, kiddo," he finally said, his voice thick with an emotion I couldn't quite place. It was more than just sadness. It was a deep, ancient guilt. "I'm so damn sorry. I should have told you years ago. I was a coward." The words hung in the frigid air between us. You knew," I whispered, my own voice unrecognizable. "All this time, everything you knew." He sank down onto the bench beside me, the old wood groaning under his weight. He nodded, his gaze still fixed on the photograph of the young, sad woman. "I was the driver," he said, his voice soft and raspy with memory. "I was the one who found her, after her folks threw her out. She was sleeping in her car, just a kid herself, Nathan, scared to death and all alone in the world. Took her to the hospital when her time came. I was the one who held you in my arms right after you were born." Paused, taking a ragged breath. "Thought God help me. I thought I was doing the right thing. My son Robert, he and Ellen, they wanted a child so badly. They'd been through years of heartbreak. I thought they would be better. I thought they would love you like their own. I thought I was giving you both a gift." He finally turned to look at me, and in the dim light I could see the glint of tears in his eyes. It was the single biggest mistake of my entire life. He told me everything then, the whole sordid story. He explained that he'd convinced a reluctant Robert and a hesitant Ellen to adopt me. It was a private arrangement handled quietly by a family friend, a doctor named Wilson, to avoid any legal ties back to the Thorntons, who wanted nothing to do with me. He had watched in silent, gut-wrenching agony for years as they mistreated me, his guilt a constant, heavy companion. Every dismissive word from Ellen, every harsh rebuke from Robert, was a knife in his own gut. The rage that had been simmering inside me finally boiled over. "So why, Grandpa?" I demanded, my voice rising, cracking with a lifetime of pain. "Let me go through all of that. Why watch it happen? You're the only one I trusted. Why tonight? What makes tonight so special?" He didn't flinch from my anger. He seemed to accept it as his due. He looked down at his own gnarled hands, resting on his knees. "I had a health scare a few months back," he admitted, his voice dropping to a near whisper. "Little problem with my heart. Nothing major, but the doctor, He sat me down and told me I needed to get my affairs in order. And I realized, sitting there in that cold office, you are my most important affair. Nathan, you are the biggest, most important thing in my life. I couldn't go to my grave carrying this secret. I couldn't let you spend one more day, one more holiday, chasing people who would never, ever deserve the love you so freely offered. His confession didn't feel like a release. It felt like a betrayal from the only direction I had thought was safe. The one person who had been my anchor in a sea of indifference had been the architect of my prison. He hadn't just watched me suffer. He had, in his own way, enabled it. He had chosen his son's fragile peace over my well-being year after year. You let them, I said, the words tasting like ash in my mouth. You let them treat me like I was nothing. You heard Ellen call me by a different name in public. You saw Sophia throw my gifts in the trash. You saw Robert look at me with nothing but contempt. You stood by and you watched them try to break my spirit every single day for 30 years. Grandpa, you watched. The accusation hung in the air, raw and brutal. I wanted him to defend himself. Wanted him to have a reason, an excuse, anything to lessen the sting of this new betrayal. But he didn't. Just sat there and took it. Tears now streaming freely down his weathered face, carving paths through the dust and grime of a long life. I know, he choked out, the words ripped from his throat. And I will go to my grave, never forgiving myself for it. Every time I saw you, every time I saw the hope in your eyes, it was like a knife twisting in my gut. I thought if I could just give you a little bit of what they wouldn't, if I could teach you things, show you some kindness, I thought I could. Make up for it, but it wasn't enough. It was never, ever enough. It was just a bandage on a gaping wound, and I was too much of a coward to stop the bleeding at its source. I was afraid of losing my own son, so I let him destroy a piece of you. I wanted to scream at him. I wanted to rage and throw the box of secrets into the dark river. I wanted to get in my car and drive away from him, from all of them, from this whole cursed life that had been built on a foundation of lies. But as I looked at him, this broken old man who was crumbling before my very eyes, the rage felt exhausting. It was there, a white-hot coal in my chest. But it was buried under a 30-year avalanche of confusion, loneliness, and a grief so profound I didn't even have a name for it. I wasn't just Nathan, the unloved foster kid anymore. That identity, as painful as it was, had been simple. Now who was I? I was Nathan, the son of a woman named Clara, a woman who had wanted me, a woman who had been searching for me. I was the grandson of the man who had orchestrated my entire life, a man whose love was real, but whose silence had cost me everything. My entire sense of self had been a carefully constructed lie. A group project conceived by the cruelty of his son and enabled by his own fearful silence. The emptiness I felt was vast and terrifying. I was a ghost haunting a life that had never really been my own. We sat there in the crushing silence for what felt like an eternity. The only sound was the mournful whistle of the wind as it swept up from the river valley. The initial shockwave of the revelation had passed, leaving a strange, cold clarity in its wake, the eerie calm in the eye of a hurricane. My gaze fell again to the papers on the bench, the photograph of Clara, the stack of her returned letters, a physical monument to 30 years of thwarted love. She had tried. She had been out there all this time, a beacon of hope I never knew existed. And they, Robert and Ellen, had deliberately, methodically stood in the way. They hadn't just failed to love me. They had actively conspired to prevent me from being loved by my own mother. They had stolen her from me and me from her. A new feeling began to crystallize in my chest, a feeling as hard and sharp as a diamond, displacing the suffocating emptiness. It was determination, cold, clear, and absolute. I wasn't just going to pack a bag and run off to Seattle to find my mother. That would be an escape, and I was done running. Caping would be letting Robert and Ellen off the hook. They would just continue on with their perfect lives, their lie intact. Dismissing my departure as another one of Nathan's emotional episodes, no, they had built their comfortable, respectable family life on a foundation of deceit and my quiet suffering. They had cashed the checks, played the part of benevolent saviors to the outside world, all while systematically chipping away at a child's soul. They didn't deserve to just fade into the background of my new life. They didn't deserve a quiet exit. They deserved to be confronted. They deserved to have their carefully curated world of lies and superiority shattered into a million pieces. Just as they had shattered mine that night and every night for the last 30 years, I slowly, deliberately, began to gather the papers, placing them back into the folder with a newfound purpose. I stood up. I turned to Henry, who was watching me, his expression a mixture of fear and hope. My voice when I spoke was steady for the first time that night. It was the voice of a man, not a boy. "I'm going to meet her," I said, the words solid and sure in the cold air. "I'm going to fly to Seattle and I'm going to meet my mother." I paused, letting the weight of that statement settle. "But first, we have one last piece of business to take care of in Omaha. You and me. We're going back to that house, and we're going to burn it to the ground." Metaphorically speaking, the next morning, my apartment was no longer a sanctuary. It felt like a stage set for a play that had abruptly closed. The furniture, the books, the framed photos of Nebraska landscapes, all artifacts of a life lived by a person who no longer existed. The Nathan who had decorated this apartment was a man chasing ghosts. I was a man hunting dragons. Henry had slept fitfully on my couch, refusing the offer of my bed, looked a decade older, the events of the previous night having carved new lines into his face. But as we sat at my small kitchen table, a pot of strong coffee brewing between us, I saw a new resolve in his eyes. The guilt was still there, but it was now overlaid with a sense of purpose. We spread the contents of the folder out on the table, not as fragments of a painful past, but as evidence in a case we were building. "This can't be just an emotional outburst," I said, my mind for the first time clicking back into the familiar, comforting gear of a financial analyst. I dealt in facts, in data, in leverage. This confrontation would be a hostile takeover of the family narrative. They'll deny everything. Henry nodded slowly, his gaze fixed on the letters. They'll call Clara a liar, a troubled woman from the past. They'll paint themselves as the victims who took in her unwanted child. You're right. Your word against theirs. They've had 30 years to perfect their story. He reached into the deep inner pocket of his worn coat and pulled out another envelope, this one a standard business size, and slid it across the table. "I was hoping I'd never have to show you this," he said, his voice grim. "But I had a feeling this day might come." I opened it. Inside were photocopies of financial statements, trust account summaries, and bank records dating back nearly 30 years. They were from a trust account, the Thornton Family Trust, and they showed a regular monthly payment, a substantial one, more than the mortgage on their house being wired directly into a joint account belonging to Robert and Ellen. The memo line on each transfer was brutally clear: child custody and support, and Thornton. My blood ran cold. It was one thing to suspect, to know in your gut. It was another to see it in black and white. They were getting paid, I whispered the words, catching in my throat. All this time, every month, they were getting paid to raise me. It was part of the agreement Clara's father insisted on before he washed his hands of her. Henry explained, his voice laced with a deep, abiding shame. He wanted to ensure you had everything you needed, that you wouldn't be a financial burden. It was his way of solving his conscience. I never imagined they would take the money and treat you like you were a stray they'd taken in off the street. It wasn't an inheritance, Nathan. It wasn't a gift. It was a salary for the job of being your parents, and they failed to perform their duties. This was it. This was the fulcrum, the leverage. It transformed the narrative from one of emotional neglect, he said. She said affair to one of tangible, provable fraud. This wasn't just about a broken heart anymore. This was about a broken contract. This was about a 30-year lie that had been very, very profitable for them. The dragons now had a weak spot, and I had the spear to pierce it. My next step felt momentous. My hand was surprisingly steady as I picked up my phone and dialed the number on the private investigator's business card. I was half expecting a machine, but a man with a gruff, no-nonsense voice answered on the second ring. Davies, my name is Nathan, I said, my voice clear and even. I believe you've been looking for me, on behalf of a client named Clara Thornton. There was a sharp, stunned intake of breath on the other end of the line, followed by a moment of complete silence. Then, well, I'll be damned. The voice was suddenly less gruff, tinged with something like wonder. Kid, do you have any idea how long your mother has been searching for you? A solid decade. We've been at this for 10 years. What happened? I asked. Why couldn't you find me? Davies let out a long, low whistle that crackled over the phone. Oh, we found you. Found you about 8 years ago. The problem wasn't finding you, it was getting to you. Your foster father, Robert, he's a piece of work. The moment we made our first inquiry, he lawyered up. His lawyer sent us a formal cease and desist letter. Claimed you were a private individual who had no interest in being contacted. Said you were happy, well adjusted, and that any attempt to contact you would cause undue emotional distress and disrupt your life. He made it sound like he was your fierce protector, saving you from some unstable woman from the past. He threatened to file for a restraining order if we persisted. The cold fury in my chest, which I thought couldn't get any more intense, found a new depth. He hadn't just hidden me. He had used the very legal system designed to protect people to build a fortress around his lie, painting my own mother as a threat. He had weaponized my own well-being against her. She's going to want to see you, Nathan, Davies said, his voice softening. She's a good woman. She's never given up hope. I can have you on a flight to Seattle by this afternoon. Can call her right now? My heart leaped at the thought, a wild, soaring thing. The idea of seeing her, of talking to her, was a magnetic pull, but I reined it in. Not yet. The sequence of events mattered. I want that, I said, my voice firm. More than anything. But not yet. I need you to do something for me first. I need you to arrange a meeting. Call her. Tell her you found me. Tell her I'm okay. And tell her I want to see her. But tell her. Tell her I have one last piece of business to take care of in Omaha. A 30-year-old account that needs to be settled. Tell her I'll be there as soon as it's done. Hanging up the phone, I felt a seismic shift in my own sense of power. It was a foreign feeling, but not an unwelcome one. For my entire life, I had been the one waiting for an invitation, waiting for a phone call, waiting for a sign. For the first time, I was the one setting the terms. I was the one making the call. The game had changed because I was finally ready to play. 2 days later, on a cold and gray Sunday afternoon, Henry and I walked up the perfectly manicured stone pathway to the house. The oak tree on the front lawn, the one I had tried to climb as a boy before Robert told me I would damage the property, was bare, its skeletal branches reaching for a colorless sky. I knew their routine. Sunday was their day of rest, of performative, family togetherness. They would all be there, basking in the aftermath of their church service, reinforcing the facade of the perfect, God-fearing family. This time I didn't hesitate. I didn't linger. I walked up the 3 steps to the porch and pressed the doorbell. The cheerful, melodic chime sounding like a declaration of war. A few moments later, the heavy oak door swung open. Ellen stood. There, a polite, welcoming smile fixed on her face. The smile faltered, then dissolved completely when she saw not just me, but Henry, standing grim-faced behind me. Her eyes widened almost imperceptibly. Nathan and Henry, she said, recovering quickly, her voice a cascade of false, tinkling sweetness. What a lovely surprise. We weren't expecting you. We're not staying long, Ellen, I said, my tone flat, and devoid of the warmth she was feigning. I didn't wait for an invitation. I stepped past her over the threshold and into the foyer, my shoes making no sound on the plush oriental rug. The house smelled the same as it always had, of lemon polish, potpourri, and a faint, indefinable scent of unhappiness. Henry followed. Me, his presence a solid, silent weight at my back. We walked into the living room. It was a scene straight from a magazine. Robert was settled in his favorite hub-backed leather armchair, the Sunday paper spread before him. Kevin, the eternal man-child, was sprawled on the pristine white couch, his thumb flicking endlessly through his phone. Sophia was curled up in another chair, meticulously filing her nails, the picture of bored suburban elegance. The perfect family, frozen in their natural habitat. Robert lowered his paper, his brow furrowing in annoyance at our intrusion. "What is the meaning of this?" he boomed, his voice accustomed to instant obedience, barging in here on a Sunday. I ignored him and let my gaze sweep over the room, over each of them. "I just have a few questions," I said, my voice calm and dangerously quiet, forcing them to lean in to listen about my childhood. A few details I need clarified for my own peace of mind before I move on with my life. Sophia let out an exaggerated, theatrical sigh and snorted a sound of pure derision. "Oh, here we go again," she said, not even bothering to look up from her nails. "The poor little orphan boy and his tragic backstory. Can't you just for once be grateful for what you were, given it's getting so old?" I turned my full attention to her. I met her gaze, and for the first time in her life, she didn't see the hurt, insecure little boy she was so used to tormenting. She saw a stranger, a man with eyes as cold and hard as river stones. She flinched, her hand pausing in midair. "That's actually the very topic I'm here to discuss, Sophia," I said, pulling a thick manila folder from under my arm. What exactly I was given? I walked over to the polished mahogany coffee table, the centerpiece of their carefully curated room, and I placed the folder down with a soft but definitive thud. The sound seemed to suck all the air out of the room. Eyes were on me now. The TV murmured in the background, but no one was listening. I opened the folder and began my presentation, not as a son, but as a prosecutor laying out his case. First, I slid the faded photograph of Clara across the polished wood until it stopped directly in front of Robert. "Do you recognize her?" I asked, my voice a low, even hum in the suddenly silent room. Ellen, who had followed us in, let out a tiny involuntary gasp. Robert's jaw tightened, a muscle twitching violently in his cheek. He stared at the photo, his face a carefully blank mask, but I could see the flicker of panic in his eyes. "I don't know what you're talking about," he blustered, his voice a little too loud. "Some old photograph? What is this, Nathan? Some kind of game?" "Her name is Clara," I said calmly, letting her name hang in the air like a ghost. "She's my mother. My biological mother." Sophia's jaw dropped. Kevin finally looked up from his phone, his mouth agape. Next, I took out the thick stack of returned letters bound with a rubber band. I placed them next to the photograph. "She's been writing to me for years," I explained, my voice still level, still controlled. "Birthday cards, Christmas cards. Letters just to say she was thinking of me. Funny, I never received any of them. They were all sent back to her, unopened, stamped with those 3 little words. Returned to sender, sent back from this address. She was a troubled girl, Ellen." Stammered, finding her voice, her hand fluttering to her throat. We were protecting you, Nathan, from more heartbreak, from a woman who abandoned you." "Protecting me?" I laughed, and the sound was harsh, bitter, and utterly devoid of humor. It was the sound of a 30-year-old joke finally reaching its punchline. "Are you sure you weren't protecting your arrangement?" And then I played my final card, the ace of spades that would incinerate their entire narrative. I took out the financial statements, the bank records, the trust account summaries. I laid them out in a neat, undeniable row like tombstones. I had used a highlighter. The bright yellow lines screamed from the pages. "Let's talk about the college fund you never bothered to set up for me," I said, my voice dropping to a near whisper, forcing them to strain to hear were the braces I needed, but never got. "Let's talk about the car I had to buy myself by working 2 jobs in college, and then let's talk about this." I tapped the highlighted line item on the top statement. "The monthly wire transfer from the Thornton Family Trust. Payment has been deposited into your joint account. Every single month." It wasn't a funeral fund for a long-lost relative, was it, Robert? It wasn't a gift. It was a contract. You were paid a salary to be my parents. I finally looked up, meeting Robert's eyes directly. And based on my childhood and the clear evidence of emotional and financial neglect, I'd say you're guilty of gross misconduct and 30 years of fraud." The room was utterly, profoundly still. The only sound was the frantic ticking of the grandfather clock in the hall, counting down the seconds of their old life. The game was over. Checkmate. Robert stared at the papers on the table, his face, a ghastly shade of gray. Carefully constructed mask of the powerful, in-control patriarch had shattered, revealing the weak, frightened man beneath, the real estate mogul, the man whose disapproval had been the driving force of my life, looked small, pathetic, defeated. Ellen was the first to break the silence. Her composure, her most prized possession, crumbled into dust. "How dare you?" she shrieked, her voice thin and shrill, cracking with hysteria. "How dare you come into our home and make these vile accusations after everything we did for you? We gave you a roof over your head. We fed you. We clothed you. You ungrateful. Ungrateful little, you did what you were paid to do, Ellen." I cut her off, my voice as sharp and cold as a shard of ice. "And you did it poorly. The contract wasn't for a room in the attic and secondhand clothes. The implied contract was for love, for support, for a family. You cashed the checks, but you never delivered the goods." Sophia, who had always seen her parents as infallible titans, was looking from the damning papers on the table to their ashen faces. Her perfectly made-up face was a canvas of confusion and dawning horror. "Mom, Dad," she whispered, is it true? Did you take money to raise him all that time?" It was. "It was complicated, Sophia. You don't understand the pressures we were under," Robert had snapped, unable to meet his own daughter's horrified, disillusioned gaze. The argument had raged. For hours, a toxic storm of accusations and recriminations that had been brewing for 3 decades. Every resentment, every compromise, every lie they had told each other and themselves came pouring out. The secret of my existence and the money that came with it had been the glue that held their dysfunctional marriage together, a shared conspiracy. Now that the lie had been ripped away, they were left with nothing but the ugly truth of their own greed, their own cruelty, and their own emptiness. The perfect family was a sham, and now they all knew it. The foundation wasn't just cracked, it had been pulverized into dust. And as they stood screaming at each other in the wreckage of their living room, surrounded by the trappings of a life they had bought with my mother's money, they finally had no one to blame but themselves. "I'm done," I said quietly to the room, to them, to myself. I turned my back on them, on the wreckage of their lives, and walked out the door. Henry was right beside me. This time I didn't look back. The flight to Seattle felt like a passage between two worlds. As the plane climbed through the thick gray blanket of Midwestern clouds and broke through into the brilliant, unending sunshine above, I felt a lightness I had never known. It was the freedom of a prisoner walking out of his cell after a 30-year sentence. Blinking in the unfamiliar sunlight, I was untethered, but not lost. I was finally free to chart my own course. Henry was quiet for the first hour of the flight, his head resting against the window, his eyes closed. I knew the confrontation had taken a tremendous toll on him. To stand before your own son and declare him a failure, to lay bare the deepest, most shameful secrets of your family, it was an act of immense courage and profound pain. "Are you okay, Grandpa?" I asked softly, leaning over the armrest. He opened his eyes. They were tired, etched with red, but they were clearer than I had ever seen them. A faint, weary smile touched his lips. "I'm better than I've been in 30 years, kiddo," he said, his voice raspy. He reached over and patted my hand. "The truth is a heavy burden. To carry, I feel lighter." He turned to face me fully. "Enough about that mess. Let's talk about your mother." And he did. For the rest of the flight, he painted a portrait of Clara, not with broad, dramatic strokes of tragedy, but with the small, intimate details that bring a person to life. He didn't talk about the powerful CEO she had become. He talked about the young woman he had known. He told me she had a laugh that started in her belly and could fill a whole room with joy. He told me she was stubborn as a mule, a trait, he said. He recognized in me every time I argued a point with him. Told me she loved the smell of rain on hot asphalt, the taste of dark chocolate with sea salt, and the sound of old jazz records. He described how she would hum to herself when she was concentrating a little off-key. He told me about her fierce loyalty to the people she cared about and her surprising, goofy sense of humor. He was giving me more than just information. Was giving me memories secondhand, though they were. He was building a bridge across the 30 years of silence, helping me to know the person, not just the myth. He was showing me that my mother wasn't just a sad story in a letter. She was a real, living, breathing woman. A woman who loved jazz and dark chocolate. A woman who was waiting for me. As he spoke, I felt the last vestiges of my anger towards him melt away, replaced by a deep, complicated, and overwhelming gratitude. Yes, he had made a terrible mistake by staying silent for so long. His fear had cost me dearly, but he had also been my only source of light in a very dark place. He had been the keeper of my story, and in the end, he was the one who had walked with me through the fire and handed me the key to my own freedom. By the time the plane began its descent into Seattle, the gray waters of Puget Sound appearing below us, I felt a sense of calm anticipation. I wasn't flying toward a stranger anymore. I was flying toward a possibility, the possibility of a home, the possibility of a mother. I didn't know it at the time, of course, but as our plane was touching down in Seattle, the house I had just left behind in Omaha was imploding. The quiet, controlled demolition I had initiated had triggered a series of secondary explosions, tearing through the fragile structure of their family, according to Henry's sister, who called him a few days later with a full, gossipy report. The moment the front door closed behind us, the stunned silence was shattered by Ellen's furious, hysterical sobbing. But they were not the tears of a grieving or remorseful mother. They were the hot, bitter tears of a narcissist whose perfect image had been irrevocably shattered. "This is all your fault." She had screamed at Robert, her voice a venomous shriek. "Your father, your disgusting family secrets, you've ruined us. You've ruined everything. My fault." Robert had roared back, his own shock and humiliation curdling into a volcanic rage. "You're the one who could never stand the sight of him. You're the one who treated him like a servant in our own home. You're the one who was so obsessed with appearances, with what the neighbors would think." Sophia, for the first time in her pampered, privileged life, was seeing the ugly, snarling monsters behind the masks of her perfect parents. The foundation of her world had turned to sand. "Is it true?" She had apparently kept asking, her voice small and trembling. "Did you really take money to raise him all that time?" "It was complicated, Sophia. You don't understand the pressures we were under," Robert had snapped, unable to meet his own daughter's horrified, disillusioned gaze. The argument had raged for hours, a toxic storm of accusations and recriminations that had been brewing for 3 decades. Every resentment, every compromise, every lie they had told each other and themselves came pouring out. The secret of my existence and the money that came with it had been the glue that held their dysfunctional marriage together, a shared conspiracy. Now that the lie had been ripped away, they were left with nothing but the ugly truth of their own greed, their own cruelty, and their own emptiness. The perfect family was a sham, and now they all knew it. The foundation wasn't just cracked, it had been pulverized into dust, and as they stood screaming at each other in the wreckage of their living room, surrounded by the trappings of a life they had bought with my mother's money, they finally had no one to blame but themselves. We met in a quiet, unassuming coffee shop in Pike Place Market. The air was thick with the rich, comforting smell of roasted coffee beans and the damp, clean scent of Seattle rain. Through the large window, I could see the gray expanse of the water and the bustling energy of the market. It felt like a different planet from the flat, landlocked world of Omaha. I saw her before she saw me. She was sitting at a small table by the window, nervously twisting a paper napkin in her hands, tearing it into tiny shreds. She looked older than the photograph, of course. 30 years had etched fine lines around her eyes and mouth, and her blonde hair was now a sophisticated, stylish silver, but the posture was the same. A certain vulnerability, a tension in her shoulders. And then she looked up, her gaze sweeping the room, and her eyes, they were the same. My eyes a blue so deep and clear, it felt like you could fall into it. I started walking toward her, my legs feeling heavy, disconnected from my body. my heart, was a wild bird beating its wings frantically against the cage of my ribs. This was the moment my entire life had been unknowingly pivoting towards. She saw me, and her breath hitched audibly. Her hand flew to her mouth, her own blue eyes widening in disbelief, then flooding with a wave of emotion so powerful it was almost a physical force. She knew instantly. "Nathan?" she whispered, her voice a fragile, hopeful question. I could only nod, my throat suddenly tight and constricted, a knot of 30 years of unspoken words lodged there. She pushed her chair back and stood up, her movements jerky, uncertain. For a long, suspended moment, we just stared at each other across the small 2-foot space of the tabula, chasm of 3 decades stretching between us. Then, slowly, hesitantly, as if afraid I might be a mirage that would vanish, she opened her arms. I stepped forward and into her embrace. And it was strange. It wasn't the lightning bolt of instant connection, the cinematic reunion I had vaguely imagined. It was awkward, clumsy, the hug of 2 profound strangers who shared the most intimate bond imaginable. I was stiff, unsure of where to put my hands. I could feel her whole body trembling against mine. And soon, I could feel the dampness of her tears soaking through the shoulder of my jacket. "I'm so sorry," she wept, her voice muffled against my chest. "Oh, Nathan, I am so sorry for everything." I didn't know what to say. The script for this moment had never been written. Forgiveness felt like a foreign country I had no visa for. The word mom felt like it belonged to someone. Also, I just stood there holding this trembling, weeping stranger who was my mother. And I said the only thing that felt honest, the only thing that felt real. "I'm here now." Clara Thornton was a paradox. The woman who had wept in my arms in the coffee shop was vulnerable, filled with a lifetime of regret. The woman who invited me to her stunning penthouse apartment overlooking Puget Sound that evening was a force of nature. She was warm, fiercely intelligent, and possessed a quiet, confident energy that filled the room. She was everything my foster family was not: genuine, present. And she listened with an intensity that made you feel like you were the only person in the world. She was also, as I quickly learned, the founder and CEO of Thornton Enterprises, a multi-billion-dollar tech firm she had literally built from the ground up. Her first instinct was to give me everything. She wanted to shower me with the 30 years of love and resources I had been denied. She offered me a key to the penthouse. She offered me a corner office next to hers. She offered me a vice president title and a salary that made my head spin. I refused it all. We were sitting on our balcony, the city lights of Seattle glittering below us like a carpet of fallen stars. "I can't," I told her, my voice firm but not unkind. "I appreciate it more than you." "No, but I don't want a handout. I've spent my entire life feeling like I was an obligation, a charity case. I need to earn my place on my own terms. I need to know that I belong somewhere because of who I am, not because of who my mother is." I watched her face carefully, afraid she would be hurt or offended. Instead, I saw a flicker of profound understanding and then a flash of fierce pride in her eyes. She got it. Of course she got it. She was a woman who had built her own worth from nothing. So, she gave me a challenge instead of a gift. The next day, I met with her board of directors. Instead of a title, she gave me a task. She put me in charge of launching a new independent venture capital fund within the company, focused on investing in sustainable technology startups. It was a high-stakes, high-pressure project, a real test of every skill I had ever developed as an analyst. It was also a brilliant move. I wouldn't be reporting directly to her, but to the board, which meant I had to prove my value to them, not just to her. The board included her sharp, skeptical head lawyer, a man named Michael, who looked at me over the top of his glasses with an expression that made it perfectly clear. He wasn't going to give me an easy time just because I was the boss's long-lost son. In our first meeting, he grilled me on my investment philosophy, my risk assessment strategies, my 5-year projections. It was tough, it was intimidating, and it was exactly what I needed. I rented a small, functional apartment downtown and threw myself into the work. For the first time in my life, my ambition felt clean. It wasn't tainted by a desperate, pathetic need for external approval. It was about the work itself. It was for me. A few months later, Henry moved to Seattle. Clara, in a gesture of quiet love, had a beautiful, sprawling container garden built for him on a section of her massive balcony. The three of us started a new tradition, Sunday dinner. They weren't perfect. They were often awkward, filled with long silences as we navigated the strange new territory of being a family. We were three people bound by love and secrets, learning each other's rhythms, one shared meal. One quiet conversation, one tentative step at a time. It wasn't a fairy tale. It was something better. It was real. About 6 months after I moved to Seattle, I got the phone call I had been half expecting a ghost reaching out from my former life. I was in my office late at night going over a prospectus. The caller ID flashed a number from Omaha. It was Sophia. Her voice when I answered was almost unrecognizable. The bored, sarcastic drawl was gone, replaced by a thin, frantic edge of panic. "Nathan, thank God you answered." I didn't know who else to call. "What is it, Sophia?" I asked, my voice neutral. I felt a strange sense of detachment, like a doctor observing a patient. "It's Kevin," she said, the words tumbling. "Out in a rush? He's in deep, really deep this time. He got involved with some very bad people, some kind of loan shark. He owes them a lot of money, a ridiculous amount. And they're threatening him, Nathan. They're threatening to hurt him. They said they're going to come to the house." She took a shuddering breath. "Dad's talking about divorce. Mom is a wreck. It's a complete nightmare. You have to help us." The old Nathan, the rescuer, the one who craved the role of the hero, would have felt a surge of adrenaline, of responsibility. The old Nathan would have seen this as his chance, his final opportunity to prove his worth, to swoop in and save them, and finally win their gratitude. But I wasn't the old Nathan anymore. That person had died on a cold November night in a park overlooking the Missouri River. I was silent for a long moment, listening to her ragged breathing on the other end of the line. "I'm sorry to hear that, Sophia," I said finally, my voice calm and steady. "That sounds like a terrible situation, and it sounds like a problem for Kevin, Robert, and Ellen to solve." There was a stunned silence. "But your family," she cried, her voice rising in disbelief. "You always help. You always fix things." "No, Sophia," I said, and the words felt like the truest, most liberating words I had ever spoken. "You are Robert's family. My family is here in Seattle. I am no longer a part of your financial ecosystem." I paused, then delivered the final, clean cut. "The contract is over. Payments have stopped." I could hear her sputtering on the other end, a mixture of disbelief, fury, and the dawning, terrifying realization that her safety net was gone. I didn't wait for her to formulate a response. I didn't need to hear anymore. "I truly wish you the best," I said, and I hung up the phone. I didn't feel a shred of guilt. I didn't feel anger. I didn't even feel satisfaction. I just felt a profound and peaceful quiet. The last chain had been broken. I was free. A year can change everything. It can take a life that was broken and shattered and slowly, patiently piece it back together into something new, something stronger. I stood on the balcony of my own apartment in Seattle. It was a little bigger than the first one, with a view of the water and the mountains. The venture capital fund I had been tasked with building was a resounding success. Our first round of investments had yielded spectacular results, and I had earned not only a significant promotion and a bonus that made my eyes water, but something far more valuable: the genuine, unqualified respect of Michael and the rest of the board. I wasn't Clara's son anymore. I was Nathan, the guy who knew how to pick winners. My relationship with Clara had blossomed from something awkward and tentative into a bond of deep, quiet love. We still had our moments of navigating the past, but now they were punctuated by easy laughter and shared jokes. I had started calling her Mom, and the word, which had once felt so foreign, now felt like the most natural thing in the world. Henry was thriving. How the Seattle rain seemed to agree with him. His garden on Clara's balcony was a riot of color and life, a testament to his patient hands. His heart was stronger, his laughter more frequent. Watching him and Clara together, sharing stories, bickering playfully over what to have for dinner, filled a hole in my heart I didn't even know was still there. With a portion of my bonus, I had started a small foundation. It was called the Anchor Project. It provided pro bono legal aid and investigative services to adopted children who, as adults, were seeking to connect with their biological parents, helping them navigate the very kind of legal and emotional fortresses that Robert had built around me. I had met with the first young woman we were helping just last week, and seeing the hope in her eyes as we talked about finding her mother. It was a feeling of purpose I had never known. I had found my place. I belonged. Not because of blood. Not because of a shared name, but because of choice. We had chosen each other. Every day we woke up and chose to be a family. And then, on a Tuesday afternoon, just like any other, the letter arrived. It was forwarded from my office. The envelope was cheap, the handwriting messy. It was from Sophia. I almost threw it away, but curiosity, or perhaps some lingering echo of the past, made me open it. It wasn't a demand this time. It wasn't a plea for money. It was a long, rambling, and surprisingly honest letter written on notebook paper. She told me about the year from hell they had endured. Kevin's debt had, in fact, cost them the house. They had been forced to sell it at a loss to cover what he owed. Divorce between Robert and Ellen had been finalized, and it had been brutal and ugly. With both of them using their lawyers to sling mud and accusations at each other, Robert had moved into a soulless condo across town. Ellen was living with her sister. Kevin had disappeared. No one knew where. Sophia was working 2 jobs as a waitress and a retail clerk to pay for her small apartment. The glamour, the privilege, the entitlement hit had all been stripped away, leaving behind a young woman I barely recognized. At the end of the letter, she didn't ask for anything. She just wrote one haunting paragraph. I've been thinking a lot about what you said about our childhood. I keep trying to remember it the way you do, but I can't. All I remember is being happy. But then I wonder if I was only happy because you were there to be unhappy for me. Was it all really that bad? I honestly don't remember it that way. Maybe I just didn't want to see it. It was the first flicker of introspection, the first hint of genuine self-awareness I had ever seen from her. It was a question, not a demand. I stood on my balcony, holding the letter, the cool Seattle wind whipping at the thin paper. The old me would have seen this as an opening, a chance for reconciliation. The new me saw it for what it was, a complicated, messy loose end from a life I had left behind. I didn't have an answer for her. Not yet. Forgiveness wasn't a simple transaction you could sign off on. Healing wasn't a straight line. I looked across the water towards the glittering lights of downtown, towards Clara's building where she and Henry were waiting for me for our weekly dinner. My decision, whatever it would come from this place of strength, of safety, of a love that was chosen, not bought. It would be my choice. For the first time in my entire life, that was more than enough. Thank you so much for listening to my story. I know it was a long one, but I hope it resonated with it. You, in some way. Have you ever had to redefine what the word family means to you, or had to walk away from a situation that was no longer serving you? I'd love to hear about your experiences and your own stories of strength. Please share your story in the comments below, and don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss what's next. You are not alone.